What do you know? Oregon's the number one team in all the land. And they should be.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Who is Oregon's toughest remaining game? I'll answer that question. And my favorite segment of every week, post-game individual standouts, because some guys just need a shout-out. But so does Dan Lanning. So does the entire coaching staff. So does the entire team, administration, anybody involved with the program in the last few years that has helped drive Oregon be the number one team in college football in the AP poll for the first time since 2012. They absolutely deserve it. You can't get to this particular place without a couple of things. Number one, you have to have had a great season the year prior. Oregon did that. Wasn't a perfect season, but it was a 12-win season, and that's only happened a handful of times in the history of Oregon football. Number two, you have to have a strong offseason to make people outside of Eugene and in the media landscape think, hey, they can play at this sort of level again. They accomplished that. And then number three, you have to go on the field and make what looks to be the case on paper play out in real time. Because as we've seen across the entire college football landscape this year, not everything that should play out on paper plays out on the field. Alabama, Vanderbilt, Texas, Georgia. Now, those things are not in the same breath, but we understand that everyone on paper, not everyone, I thought Georgia would win the football game, and alas, they did. Lots of people were in the camp of, Texas is just better. Texas has just been the better team. Texas is at home, and Georgia was the better team start to finish. There was a little blip in there where Texas was better, aided by throwing water bottles onto the field. I guess that's what Autzen fans should have done when they didn't review the play, is just start throwing things on the field. I don't know. I mean, the call was right. There never should have been pass interference, but it's not a great look for college football there. But I digress. Oregon has backed it up. Yeah, week one against Idaho, bad. I said at the time, I'll stand by. It's the worst performance by a Dan Lanning coached Oregon football team. There is not a performance that has been worse. 49-3 against Georgia 2 years ago in Lanning's first ever game as a head coach, with a lot of players that he didn't know necessarily or didn't recruit, against Georgia, who went on to win national championship. Yeah, that was not the worst performance. It was not. Losing by a field goal or less. Actually, it was a field goal. The other four times that they lost, or 4 points, I think it was a 4-point loss in the, I don't know. But whatever it was, nothing was as bad as that Idaho game, which never should have been close, and it was competitive in the fourth quarter. And what has Oregon done since then? They've just played better and better and better and made Idaho a distant memory, to where everyone thinks about that game and they should wonder, how in the world did that happen when Oregon's capable of playing at this level? Because Oregon has not played its best football game yet, but its best individual performance came on the biggest stage when they beat Ohio State, who, newsflash, is a really good football team. So does Oregon being number one right now matter in the grand scheme of things? Any coach will tell you, no, it doesn't matter. And it does not matter in the long run, but it is a testament to what went into making that happen. Because you had to have the good season, you had to have the good offseason, and you have to back it up on the field. And those three things have all taken place. And guess what? There are a lot of other programs that could be in this position right now, and they're not. Because Oregon beat Ohio State. Texas didn't beat Georgia. If Texas had beaten Georgia, they would have remained the number one team in the country. Georgia's number two. I have absolutely no problem with that, because I think Penn State is a good team. If I were to rank my own top 25 of the best teams in college football, I would not have Penn State in the top 5. I'd have them in the top 10, but I would not have them in the top 5. But Oregon has earned the right to be number one. Now, if you are on the superstitious side of things, you may not love what I'm about to say. I'm going to say it anyway, because it's just a fact, and some of you, most of you perhaps, could find this in an internet rabbit hole anyway. The last time Oregon was ranked number 1, they were playing at home, and Ertz was probably out. I have watched that play since then. I'm not as adamant about that one as Dyer was down, but Oregon lost football game 17-14 because DeAnthony couldn't throw a block and Oregon couldn't pick up a yard on 4th down and or kick a field goal, which, as some people have pointed out, Lanning, take the points when they are there. The object, score more points than the other team. Field goals are indeed points, even if they're not the points you're looking for. But I, again, digress. Oregon plays Illinois this week. I'm going to talk about that matchup later on today's show. But this is not the end of the road for Oregon. You don't get ranked number 1 and think, okay, everything's great. Everything's fine. Who cares what happens the rest of the year? Reach the number 1 ranking. That's all that anybody cares about. No, I don't think Oregon fans are in that mindset. I do think it's a moment to stop and appreciate, hey, this is really hard. And there's also no real way to argue against it. If you want to look at the Idaho game, as bad as that performance was, Ohio State was every bit as impressive. Because a lot of people looked at that Ohio State roster that had, $20 million or more in NIL put into it and said, that's the best roster in all of college football. And Oregon beat them whilst playing sloppily. Ohio State did not play perfect. Will Howard dropped a snap. Yeah, Will Howard dropped a snap. All right, they didn't play perfectly. They didn't do everything well. Buckeye fans would tell you that. Oregon fans would rightfully tell you that Oregon did a lot of things wrong in that game, including almost surrendering a 2-point conversion, giving up a couple of points with the extra point debacles. And the replay review, Oregon didn't play a perfect game, still found a way to win. Still found a way. And so the way that you get to be number 1 in the AP polls, you have a great team that people think about before the season is, hey, this could be a great team. And then you go and deliver the results. And by the way, since the Idaho game, Oregon has played well every week. They didn't play their best game against Boise State. How's that win looking? They won again. They just keep. I don't know that anyone in the Mountain West is going to beat them. So if you beat the best Group of 5 team in all of college football, yeah, Oregon should have been able to beat them by more than 3. I will say on that note, I hear a lot of pundits and coaches talking on podcasts or whatever across the country saying things like, well, Oregon needed 2 special teams touchdowns. Why is it not Oregon has a depth of playmakers that allowed them 2 special teams touchdowns? Why? I've never understood, and I don't even remember exactly how I phrased it all at the time, but you don't know what the Oregon offense would have done. It moved the ball really well in the second half, but also, how you get kick return touchdowns? You have guys that are explosive and dynamic. And Noah Whittington, who I'm talking about later on today's show, and Tez Johnson, turns out they're explosive playmakers. So anyway, that win continues to look really good. And every game since then, Oregon has played like the number 1 team in all of college football. And that's why they have that ranking. This is not a fluke. This is not everyone kept losing and Oregon was just there. No, Oregon has one of the best wins in all of college football. And outside of the Idaho game, they've played exceptionally well. And anyone who wants to say, well, Idaho, you shouldn't have done this, not going to sit here and argue with you. But anything that you feel that is negative about that has to be outweighed by the fact that they showed that they can, win a game when they're not playing well, and then also go toe-to-toe with Ohio State, who a lot of people might say is the best roster in the entire country. So it's a cool thing to see. It was pretty surreal. It's the first time since 2012 that Oregon has been the number 1 team in all the land, but that's where they sit right now, and someone will have to do a lot of work to knock them off of it if Oregon keeps playing this way. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. What is Oregon's hardest remaining game? They've got 5 games left in the regular season. Where did the time go? Holy smokes. Where did the time go? But they've got 5 games left in the regular season. What's their hardest game? Is it this weekend? That's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. So, I recently attended a PGA Tour event. I had paid to be in a club area where there were unlimited drinks all day. And before I went to this event, I took a ZBiotics pre-alcohol. And guess what? I felt phenomenal. It was outstanding. This is my personal experience with it. And I'm telling you, it is great. You will feel better as you're enjoying drinks. You will feel better afterwards as well. No hangover, no problems, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, you won't be. They'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. Oregon's got Illinois this week. Is that their toughest remaining game? I can make the argument that the answer is yes. Now, they're the only team currently on Oregon's remaining schedule that is ranked. And Luke Altmaier has been playing some darn good football. I think his touchdown-interception ratio this year, either after their win against Michigan or going into it, 14-1. And he was a turnover machine at times last year. He's a completely different player. That dude looks awesome. And Brett Bielema, who Oregon has played in a Rose Bowl back on New Year's Day 2012 with LaMichael Kenyon DeAnthony and Darren Thomas, Chip Kelly and company. Brett Bielema's still around, and he can still coach a little bit. Oregon's a 21.5-point home favorite. That could be too much. Or maybe it's not enough, because we have seen when Oregon plays, who Dan Lanning likes to say that their favorite opponent is every week, when they play Oregon and they win that battle, however you see it, aka playing to their standard, they're really good. They are as good as anybody in the country. And the more I watch college football, the more I think the national championship is as within reach as it ever has been for Oregon this season. The way they're playing, the roster they have, the way the rest of college football looks, there are a lot of good teams out there. There's no singularly dominant team. And I know Oregon's number one in the country right now. On their best day, they're the best team in college football. Not everybody has their best day on a given Saturday. Because on any given Saturday, Georgia could beat them. Or Texas could beat them. Or, heck, Alabama could beat them. But if Oregon plays really well, they can beat anybody else too. So I'm torn between, frankly, any of three games as being Oregon's toughest remaining game. This is a question from Mighty Oregon, by the way. If you want to get in the mailbag, YouTube comments, or X, formerly known as Twitter, if you want priority access and a bunch of other perks, become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. But Illinois has a strong case with the way they're playing. They're playing really good football. Right now, I'd say Wisconsin. I'd say Wisconsin because the Badgers under Luke Fickell are really starting to figure things out. They have been go look at the way they have played their last three games. They're blowing out their last few opponents. Now, they've got a tougher test this week, but they're a team that kind of faded early on and has started to find their mojo. And suddenly you look up and Wisconsin is, ever since they lost to USC, they've won 3 straight games. Now, they've got Penn State at home this week. They'll have a chance to show what they're really worth. They're only 6.5-point underdogs. Granted, they are at home, but their last 3 games, Purdue 52-6, at Rutgers 42-7, at Northwestern 23-3. They're not playing the best teams in the Big Ten, but those are darn impressive scores. How are you feeling after Oregon beat Purdue 35-0? Purdue beat them, or Wisconsin beat them 52-6. So they're playing good football. Oregon's got that game on the road. On the road, and it's the game before a bye week, but then it's the game before Washington. Classic look ahead for the one game on Oregon's schedule for the rest of the regular season that Dan Lanning's just got to win. You got to win that football game. And frankly, I wouldn't sleep on Washington. They're not a great football team. They're not a terrible football team. They've got some guys. We'll talk about that more week of, but I would not sleep on Washington because whether Dan Lanning is going to ever admit it or not, he knows there's extra pressure to win that one. Now, maybe that means he comes out with the best game plan he's ever devised and Oregon wins a game by 30. That'd be great. But this is not a Washington team that Oregon is automatically going to roll, that they can just roll out of bed and beat. Like, Washington can play up to a certain level. Washington can play down to a certain level as well. But I'm going with Wisconsin because it is on the road, because you've got the look-ahead factor. And we'll see how the Badgers are playing come the middle of November. That game is on November 16th in Madison. But I've just been impressed with Wisconsin over the last couple of weeks, and I'm impressed with Illinois, but it's the home road factor for me. If you flip these, I'd say Illinois is the toughest remaining game. But the answer to me before the year for a lot of people might have been Michigan. They literally cannot complete a forward pass, and Oregon's pass defense has been elite. Will Howard remains the only quarterback to throw for over 200 yards against this Ducks defense. Nobody else has done it. Michigan's not going to start that. I feel good about Oregon winning that football game. They could lose if they don't play well, but I think they'll be able to win. Got another question asking about Big Ten tiebreakers. So this talk is premature, slightly, because there's a lot of season left, but the Big Ten tiebreakers are head-to-head first. Everyone understands that. Then, if you don't have a head-to-head matchup with which Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana all don't have, essentially what it comes down to is who has beaten the best cadre of Big Ten teams. Of the teams you've beaten, who's got the best record? Or is there a highly seeded conference opponent that everyone's beaten? But there is a world in which Penn State, Indiana, and Oregon all go undefeated in the regular season, and everyone's looking around going, who gets to go to the Big Ten championship game? And the Big Ten, the simplest way to explain the methodology, which I think is perfectly logical, who has beaten the best collection of teams? Who's had the toughest schedule to get to that record? And then eventually there are analytics that can get involved in a coin flip if it really, really gets down to it. There's a long way to go because Indiana and Penn State both have to play Ohio State, but they do not play each other. Indiana plays Michigan and Ohio State. Ohio State has to play Penn State and Michigan. They will beat Michigan. I think they will beat Penn State as well. And who goes to the Big Ten championship might come down to when Indiana travels to Ohio State, which is crazy. Indiana is one of the biggest stories in college football this year. It is a wildly unexpected situation. They were horrible a season ago. They brought in a bunch of transfers, and Curt Cignetti is that guy. They play Washington at home this week. They will not have Curtis Rourke, their quarterback. That's a huge loss. That's a huge loss. And that's where the chaos can begin. So that's the Big Ten tiebreaker situation at a glance. Keep an eye on it, but I wouldn't worry about it right now. Oregon having a win over potentially Illinois, like if they were to go undefeated, I don't think Oregon would get left out because they'd have the win over Ohio State. And, I mean, if Indiana were to go undefeated, they'd have the win over Ohio State as well. And so would Penn State. So it could get interesting. It could get very interesting. But right now, focus on Illinois. Another question came in asking me to compare Dillon Gabriel to Bo Nix. So Gabriel this year is on pace for just over 3,600 yards through 12 games, which is about what he had last year at Oklahoma. 26 touchdowns. Last year he had 37 interceptions. Last year he had 6. So pretty comparable numbers. I don't think he's running quite as much as he had in years past. But right now, Dillon Gabriel is completing 77% of his passes. Now, if you remember, Bo Nix set an NCAA record last year as the most accurate passer in a single season in the history of college football. And guess what? It was like 77.5%. Can Gabriel keep that up? It'll be tough. Illinois, haven't done a deep dive on the Illini yet. I imagine they can play at least some better defense. I don't know. They gave up a lot of points to Purdue. Some of that came with, defensive touchdowns for the Boilermakers, but I don't know if Illinois' defense is great. Oregon's favored by over 3 touchdowns for a reason. But once you face Michigan's defense, Washington's defense can do some nice things. Wisconsin on the road. I suspect he'll wind up right about where I predicted him to end up before the year, which was just over 70% completion and pretty similar numbers to a season ago. I had him over 4,000, or under 4,000, but over 3,600 in the 12 games. Kind of looks like he's on track for that. So I think holistically, though, when I look at Dillon Gabriel, he's exactly what I thought he would be. And I don't want that to come off as a knock. It's not. He's playing exactly as I thought he would. He is not Bo Nix. Doesn't need to be Bo Nix. He can be himself. And that is enough. It's always been good enough. And I think we have seen that through the first 7 games of the season. Who Dylan Gabriel is can win Oregon a national championship. And that's all that anyone should care about. Does Oregon have enough of that position with him there? They absolutely do. Keep the questions coming. Keep the comments coming. Concerns, statements of outrage, anything that you want. Individual standouts. It might be my favorite segment to do during the season. So we're going to do it next because a lot of guys need themselves a shout out. First, this episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, which has this neat feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. They've got it over there. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and their lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Do you know what time it is? It's game time. My most favorite segment, individual standouts that just need that extra sort of recognition on a show like this one that's only worthwhile because of you. So thank you all very much for listening to or watching this show. Remember to subscribe if you have not already. Biggest shout out from this game, gosh, individually, I like going beyond the obvious with some of these. Like Dylan Gabriel's good, Jordan James was himself. I want to start with Noah Whittington here because if you engage in the Twitter sphere, as I often do because many of you are over there, Noah Whittington's performance this season has been underwhelming to many an Oregon fan out there. And I have seen it as well. There has consistently been a difference when Noah Whittington's been in the game versus when Jordan James has been in the game. But let's give Noah Whittington some credit here. He has not been as effective as Jordan James. It's why he's a number 2 back. Not trying to argue that particular point. I thought it could be closer to a split backfield coming into the season. No, Whittington might not be the exact same guy that he was in 2022 and 2023 pre-injury, where he was ahead of Jordan James on the depth chart in both of those seasons. But this is a guy who flashed a little explosiveness and then just made a heck of a touchdown catch. I mean, first of all, it's a great throw from Dylan Gabriel, but it's a heck of a catch. It is one heck of a catch in the corner of the end zone there. And, you know, Oregon puts up 35 points in this game, and they ran the ball okay. It was just okay. I think not having Jordan James, like something, even though it's the same offensive line and some of the same plays, I think 2 things. Number 1, there is something to the hot hand component of playing the running back position, but you know, Whittington just feels like he's always a broken tackle away or one cut away, and he's just not quite seeing the field the way he used to. He ended the game with 9 carries for 42 yards. Jordan James, who I believe is fine, I think was a little dinged up in the second half, and they didn't want to play him. And he ended the game with 24 yards and a touchdown through the air as well. Like, he was really solid. Now, he did have a miscue, either him or the offensive line, in pass protection that led to the lone, or I think it was the lone sack of Dylan Gabriel in the game. Purdue had 2 on the game. I don't remember if that came when I think both would have been on Dylan Gabriel. But towards the end of the first half, they had a miscommunication. That sort of stuff can happen and whatnot. James has been great in blitz pickup this year, but end of the day, he was really solid. And no, I am not going to shout out one running back without shouting out Jay Harris. And this is a guy who was an All-American at Northwest Missouri State, came in via the portal in the offseason, and had a pretty sizable amount of buzz. I got questions about him over the summer regularly, like usually once every other week here on the show, and we just haven't seen him. And he scores his first touchdown as a Duck, and he ended the game 7 carries, 32 yards, 4.5 yards per touch. Whittington was 4.7, and Jay Harris was 4.6. I don't know what Jay Harris needs to show the coaching staff to get more involved. Like, I know that they clearly like Whittington, and I think he showed us why. And Jordan James is the number one back. Yeah, everybody understands that. Boy, I hope Jay Harris sticks around for next year if Jordan James goes to the NFL. Because what about that guy didn't look like he is ready for the big time? I mean, coaches see more at practice. We can only go off of what we see in the games. I was every bit as impressed with him as you were. I was watching the game with my brother, and we saw him taking carries going, wait a minute. That's exactly what we thought he could be if he was at his very best, or like the best version of Jay Harris. We thought it'd look like that. He is big. He's physical. He can push the pile. He's got lateral movement. He showed speed in space. His vision looks pretty good. Guy looks good to me. I don't know that he has a role going forward, barring an injury to Whittington or James or even Jaden Lamar, who has looked good in spurts this year. But, boy, he looked pretty darn good to me. I'll leave it at that for now. Another shout out here, Kenyon Sadiq. So Jeff Schwartz, who, as I have said many times, is a great follow for Oregon fans on Twitter, former Oregon offensive lineman, does a lot of great film breakdown stuff. He loves to talk about the big fellas because he is a big fella. He's an offensive lineman and played in the NFL for a while. He knows his stuff and explains things very well and very clearly. And he was doing some film watching and breaking down on Kenyon Sadiq. And when you think of Kenyon Sadiq, you think of the fact that without Terrence Ferguson, he steps in as the number one tight end, seemingly above Patrick Herbert, certainly in the targets department. I haven't checked the snap counts, but he has 2 catches for 58 yards. Patrick Herbert does not catch a ball. And, yeah, that guy will be the number one tight end. If you go look at some of the runs that he paved the way for, he's blocking like T-Ferg out there. And coming into this year, one of my not-so-hot takes was, by the end of the year, Kenyon Sadiq will be the number 2 tight end over Patrick Herbert. He might already be there. Terrence Ferguson, by the way, appendicitis. I don't know if he plays against Illinois. I have not double-checked. I don't even know if Oregon's released that particular information at this time. But regardless, it's amazing that Oregon can be without an all-conference guy from a season ago, a first-team All-Pac-12 performer, RIP, and have seemingly no drop-off at the position. This is why recruiting matters. Because, yes, you got to have him in the pass game, but he was pancaking, road-clearing, bulldozing guys in the run game. And that's a great thing to see. So he is every bit what we thought he was as a recruit when he came to Oregon. We thought he'd have a big, I say we, meaning myself and many of you out there who asked me questions about him. I think everybody kind of thought, yeah, he could be more involved. He could have a bigger role. That's what we've seen. And after Oregon loses T-Ferg and Patrick Herbert, that's tight end 1, no questions asked, going into next season. And I feel really good about that. And Oregon fans should as well. Speaking of guys who will be back next year that are just studs, Mateo's everywhere. Derek Harmon is everywhere. How amazing is it that Oregon's defensive line continues to play at a high level and Jordan Burch isn't there? Arguably their best, most disruptive guy, that might be Derek Harmon. Harmon is at the point where I'm surprised if he's not in the backfield at some point. He is... I don't know what his NFL draft prospects are, but he's doing himself a lot of favors with the Ducks right now. And if he stays healthy the rest of this year, I bet you his NFL draft stock is going to be sky high compared to what it was coming into the season, where I think it was already respectable. He is, I can make the case right now, he is Oregon's best defensive lineman and more important than Jordan Burch. He is so disruptive on the interior. And Mateo has taken the sophomore leap. So has Tatum Tuioti, which is how you pronounce his name, by the way. If you know, then you know. But Mateo, that's a dude. I mean, he has realized his second-year potential. Imagine what he can be next year. Just think about that for a moment. Mateo and Derek Harmon, those guys are so disruptive. I also want to shout out Devin Jackson. he is starting to make a lot more impact plays, and boy, he just looks fast. He had one play in particular. I don't remember if it was chasing down Ryan Brown, the quarterback who's really elusive, or a running back, but it was like this beautiful encapsulation of there's the speed. The guy who was just this freak athlete who Dan Lanning said, need to get going in the right direction, looks like he goes in the right direction a lot. And he makes a lot more impact plays than he did a season ago with the snaps that he gets on the field. He's playing more than he did a season ago, and he should. He absolutely should. So Cam Alexander also deserves a shout-out because he was identified as Jeremiah McLaughlin by the broadcast when he had an interception there at the end of the game to seal Oregon's first shutout, also since the 2012 season. Dan Lanning's just making little history markers left, right, and center, and you love to see it. So there are plenty of guys who played well in this game, but those are the ones that really popped to me as, man, he was making an impact, didn't always get recognized. Justice Lowe as well. Trayshawn Holden didn't play in the game. Justice Lowe definitely deserves a shout-out with the way he's been playing football. Just no drop-off. The roster that you can survive a suspension or an injury or whatever and just get the same level of production, Dan Lanning and company have done a really, really good job. If you want an individual shout-out who I didn't mention that you think deserves a mention here on the show, by all means, drop in the YouTube comments below. Thanks for making this your first listen. Go make Locked On College Football your second. I host, giving you the biggest stories in the greatest sport right here on planet Earth. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.